This is Beat the Closing Line.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Beat the Closing Line. I am your host, Nicole Russo, alongside resident NFL analyst for thelines.com, Eli Hershkovich. As you know, every Thursday, we have a special guest on here to give us some different perspective on sports betting and how the NFL season is going. Today, we're going to be talking to Eric Eager, Vice President of Research and Development at Pro Football Focus and co-host of the PFF Forecast. Eric, thanks for joining us today. How's it going?
Nicole, Eli, very nice to be with you guys. And it's week 3 already. It's crazy to me. It was only a short time ago that we were counting down the days until the season started. Now we're right in the thick of things.
Sometimes I think the anticipation's the worst part because we plan for it for about 3 months and then it feels like the season's over in 10 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get started on the interview today, make sure that you give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, make sure that you subscribe to Beat the Closing Line on Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review for your chance to win an Amazon gift card. With that being said, Eli, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Eric, so we want to talk to you about Super Bowl futures in a second, but looking at the Thursday night football game as we're recording this on Thursday morning, Browns are around a 3.5 up to 4.5 point favorite at home over Pittsburgh. Everybody's talking about the Mike Tomlin underdog record against the spread. Obviously a little different without Ben Roethlisberger. I'm sure you'll touch on that, but this total is pretty low. It got steamed down from 40.5 to around 38.5 here on Thursday morning over the last couple days. Any bets on the game? And if not, what's your perspective on either side?
Yeah, the only one that I've really worked on, and I put this on PFF.com, is I like Jacoby Brissett under passing attempts at, I think it was 26.5 or so. The big debilitating thing about weather in the NFL is not necessarily precipitation. It's not necessarily even snow or anything like that. Even cold weather is not a huge deal. It's wind, right? And we're going to see, a Cleveland Brown Stadium that's going to have, miles per hour, about 20 with wind gusts and things like that. Wasn't really a big deal last year, but I remember in the pandemic year, they had 3 straight home games, all of which had, this, weather that, prohibited passing. And I think with the run game that Cleveland has with Nick Chubb and the offensive line, which is second in the NFL right now in perfectly blocked runs. I think they're just going to run the football on Pittsburgh and keep the ball out of Jacoby Brissett's hands. Furthermore, Jacoby Brissett was a little dinged up last week, and they really can't afford to have him out. So because they don't have Watson right now, so I think they just lean off of him a little bit. So that's the prop I like in this one. Total's probably right at this point. Spread's probably right at this point. Just given how uninspiring Mitch Trubisky has been. However, I will say week 3 a couple years ago, they were facing the Jets, and that's when Baker Mayfield made his first appearance. I think if you're looking at spread and total this game, Mitch Trubisky being benched for Kenny Pickett could upturn a lot of the bets that we think are pretty solid tonight. So that adds too much uncertainty for me to bet side or total.
I think uninspiring is a very nice adjective there to use for my Steelers team, which has been pretty painful to watch. Do you feel like I'm kind of looking at game 5 for Pickett to be in? I think they give Trubisky a few more games. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You go back to when Trubisky took over for Mike Glennon, and it was very much a similar situation where the Bears wanted Mike Glennon to play, the whole season. And unfortunately, that Thursday night game against Green Bay in 17 is when they, pulled the plug on Glennon and went to Trubisky. I think having this sort of mini bye after Thursday night football is a natural time. So to me, this is Trubisky's last chance to be the starting quarterback of the Steelers. So if they can't get the ball, George Pickens was amazing in preseason. They can't get him the ball seemingly. Claypool, Johnson, they're both great, and they're all expressing frustration in the quarterback. I think if it's not actually happening tonight, I think this 10 days off is going to be the time when they make a quarterback change.
I'm with you on that one. All right, we'll get off of my Steelers because it just makes me sad to talk about them. So, after, like you said, just 2 weeks in the NFL, we're obviously seeing some pretty big movement in the Super Bowl betting market. For instance, you have the Eagles, who are now tied for the fourth shortest odds with the Packers to win it all. And they were sitting as high as 40-1 before the draft. So, based on your models, where do you see the most value?
Yeah, I still think it's a team like Tampa Bay. We would make Tampa Bay about 4-1 on the markets, and it's really simple. It's with these teams that have really struggled. A team like the Bengals in my hometown right now, it's frustrating because the Bengals have been bad, but they haven't been bad for reasons. Like all their players are playing, their offensive line's better. They're playing some relatively easy opponents in Pittsburgh and a Dakless Cowboys. For Tampa Bay, they've scored 2 touchdowns on offense in the first 8 quarters of the season, but we know why. The offensive line's banged up. The wide receivers are injured. The total on this game against Green Bay is 41.5 because Mike Evans is out, and he's a guy who's had 7 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. But when you look at where Tampa Bay is, they get Green Bay at home, then they get Kansas City at home, and after that, it's a who's who of mediocre to bad teams on their schedule: Falcons, Steelers, Panthers, Seahawks, Browns without Deshaun Watson, Saints, 49ers without Trey Lance, et cetera, et cetera. I think you're getting a value on them now just by the schedule. And the Eagles are the hot team right now, but you look around the NFC and it's strange, but like a game like Detroit, Minnesota is probably going to determine a playoff spot in this conference. And so, if I can buy the top of that, which is Tampa Bay leaning off of Brady with one of the best defenses in the NFL, I'm going to go with that one.
Yeah, and the Bucks. I'm on Tampa Bay against the Packers. I know the betting market came in on the Packers after that line opened up at 3.5, and you can read my write-up over at thelines.com for a little more analysis on that game. But Eric, selfishly, I want to ask you about the Ravens because Nicole has completely jinxed Baltimore with the injuries going back to last season, and they've carried over this year, very banged up in the secondary. Lamar Jackson now has a little bit of an elbow issue. We'll see how that impacts them. But they closed around before week 1, 18-20-1 to win it all, and then they blow the 21-point fourth quarter lead to the Dolphins last week. Now around 2.5 3-point favorites at the Patriots, and that line was juiced at Ravens -3 to open the week. But with this Ravens team long term, you mentioned the NFC with the Bucks. What do you make of Baltimore moving forward?
Yeah, we're always a little bit lower because I think Lamar Jackson is very difficult for PFF system to handle. He's just a singular player as far as running the football. We've had to go into some of like the XY tracking data to really find that value because again, like you're talking about a player who up until this year, 66% of his rushing yards were on design runs. The other quarterback in recent memory with a 1,000-yard season, Michael Vick, it was almost split. 66% were on basically scrambles, and then the other 33 were on design. So we've never seen Lamar Jackson before, which I think can lead to both types of uncertainty. Last year, what you saw was the uncertainty associated with him being injured and the team having to, have it below 500 record. You've seen the uncertainty in other years like 2019 where they can just run away from other teams. I think their defense isn't strong enough anymore to really win the 12, 13 games that you're going to need to get that 1 seed in the AFC. And I don't know if Lamar is consistent enough as a passer for you to win when you don't have the bye in the playoffs. So I'm off of the Ravens. I like the Ravens as an organization. I like the Ravens, I think the world of them, frankly. I just don't know that if this season, after we saw what we saw on Sunday, third string left tackle, secondary's banged up, pass rush is kind of non-existent. I don't know if you really want to buy into the Ravens that much going into this AFC, which has a lot of good football teams in it.
Eli likes to blame me for these for these Ravens injuries, but I knew it was just a bad omen when the mascot was out for the season in preseason and had to get carted off the field. So you had previously touched on the Vikings line, so we will just go straight into that. The Vikings are coming off of a pretty miserable looking double-digit loss to Philadelphia on Monday Night Football. The line against the Lions for week 3 opened at Minnesota -7, 7.5, and it's now down to Vikings -5.5, some at -6. What do you make of the market movement on this one?
Yeah, I think that these two teams are very similar to each other. Both have kind of middle of the pack quarterbacks who have at their highs are pretty good. Both teams have kind of bad defenses, especially in the case of both, the Minnesota Vikings, especially in the secondary. And I think the biggest one is the Vikings are going through an identity shift, right? So they average 5.77 men in the box on early downs, which is the lowest in the NFL. They're basically daring other teams to run. And unfortunately, they're getting gashed in doing so. And you look at Detroit's third in the NFL in points scored. They're first in the NFL in offensive points scored. They've done it a lot through the ground with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. Their offense was able to move the football with 3 backup offensive linemen in last week against a Washington defense that is fairly strong. I bet Detroit at plus 7.5. I thought it was an egregious number. I still think 6 is probably a bit too high for Detroit. I think Detroit is, a legitimate football team in this league. I also think, with Aiden Hutchinson and Charles Harris rushing the passer, they'll be okay on defense. And, the Vikings, after Justin Jefferson on offense, don't really have the talent, I think, to extend on a team like Detroit. So for me, I think it's Lions or nothing in this one.
At Eric Eager _ on Twitter, if you want to see the hashtag restore it, at least a few times per Sunday during these Lions games. But sticking with the NFC North, Eric, you look at the NFC North futures market, and the Packers are still the favorite to win the division, not the odds-on favorite anymore, but around even money. The Vikings you mentioned there, plus 140. Detroit anywhere between 6 or 7 to 1, and we'll exclude the Bears because we talked about this in the preseason. They're the Bears, Nicole, Mo, and I. So if you had to bet one team right now, you're pretty high on the Lions. I think you bet a Kevin O'Connell future to win NFL Coach of the Year this season. Who would you bet if you were to place one wager right now?
I honestly think, as much as I just said about the Vikings, I do think the Vikings have the 29th most difficult schedule moving forward. The Packers have the 9th most difficult schedule moving forward using our metrics at PFF. Detroit's 28th, so they're further behind there. I think it has to be the Vikings, at this point, because again, I think when you watch the difference between that team this year and last year, the coaching staff for the Vikings has a clue. It's just depending, you're basically buying into the fact that Kirk Cousins at 34 years old, after a couple bouts of COVID and that kind of thing, is not, hasn't lost his fastball. And I'm willing to make that bet. So I'm levered up on Detroit. I have Detroit at, 10 to 1 or so to win that division, 4 to 1 to make the playoffs. At that point, you're just, don't buy back into that. Just hang on to the good numbers you have. But Green Bay, I think, has fundamental issues. I think that they have a harder schedule, much harder than Minnesota does. And I think Minnesota, they've already played 2 of the tougher teams they're going to play in Green Bay and Philadelphia. And, they've had 2 multiple score games. One was a win, one was a loss. I put it at 39% for the Vikings to win that division. I put it at 44% for Green Bay. So to me, the bet is Minnesota.
Staying in the NFC North, the Bears opened as a field goal favorite after a 1-1 start. They're now down to about -2.5 against the Texans. And that game has the 3rd lowest total of the week. It is sitting at 40 right now. Do you have any insights on this game?
Yeah, the Bears stink, but the Texans are getting, I think, a little bit too much love. And look, they deserve some praise. I mean, in 2 weeks they've covered the spread against 2 teams that many people believe were going to make the playoffs in the AFC, in the Broncos and the Indianapolis Colts. Davis Mills is not a great quarterback prospect, but he's good enough right now, and they do kind of just enough things to be spunky. I'm going to bet that the majority, though, of those covers in the first 2 weeks were ineptitude by the Denver Broncos and the Indianapolis Colts. The Bears, they have the 2nd lowest passing rate in the league. Justin Fields is a very talented player, but they don't seem to trust him that much. At wide receiver, Darnell Mooney has not been productive at all. Cole Kmet has not been productive at all. I think you're buying the Bears at, weirdly, as 2.5-point favorites, the lowest of their market, and you're selling Houston at the top. So for me, it's Bears or nothing in this one.
And you mentioned the Colts within the midst of that. We've seen some dramatic line movement in their matchup against the Chiefs on Sunday. That line, I want to say on the look-ahead line, it was Chiefs -3.5, -4, got bet all the way up to 7, along probably with an adjustment there too. Now it's back down to Chiefs -5.5. So we've seen some money come in on Indianapolis this week. Total around 45.5. Any bets in this game?
Yeah, this is one where I'm taking over 50.5. I do have some on the Chiefs, but it's not based upon my numbers at all. It's just, it's honestly looking at that Colts team and thinking, how the heck are they going to compete against the Chiefs, especially off of a 10-day rest for Kansas City? But you look at, the Colts, they get Alec Pierce back. They get Michael Pittman back. They're playing indoors. Patrick Mahomes is undefeated indoors. He's also 22 touchdowns, 2 interceptions indoors. The big one for me though is, the Chiefs are going to be without Willie Gay and Trent McDuffie, 2 big starters on their defense. And the Colts run a cover 3 with Gus Bradley that when Gus Bradley was with the Raiders last year was the absolute elixir for what Patrick Mahomes was struggling with. And so I think the Chiefs are going to put up a ton of points. I think the Colts are going to be a little bit more frisky on offense than they have been the last few weeks. So over 50.5 is the bet to make in this one. And then of course, customary, and I think every bettor should bet this, but Patrick Mahomes over 2.5 touchdowns every game. Just make that bet every game.
And then sticking with the AFC South, we have the Titans, who are a home underdog against the 0-2 Raiders. Las Vegas was as high as -2.5. Now they're back down to about -1.5 too. And the total's at 45.5. Obviously, the Raiders coming off of quite a crazy loss at home last weekend against the Cardinals. What do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, to me, I like over a little bit in this game just because I think that both offenses, can move the ball against 2 bad defenses and both secondaries are not particularly great. But I do like the Titans here. I think the market is overreacting a little bit to a Tennessee team that got blown out by Buffalo, but I think Buffalo is going to blow out a lot of teams this year, and I don't know if it's going to say that much about the teams that are getting blown out by them. The Titans' offensive line with Taylor Lewan injured is going to be weaker, but Derrick Henry is, as far as running backs go, is more impervious to weaknesses along the offensive line than anybody really is. So I think that they're going to be effective. I think that the Raiders, they do have Devontae Adams, they do have Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, but Derek Carr showed on Sunday that they have a difficult time hanging on to leads. And again, their offensive line is just as bad as the Titans, and the Titans have Bud Dupree and folks to get after the passer. So I like Tennessee here at home to sort of get off the winless streak here, which would put the Raiders at 0-3 in a year where they went all in. So unfortunately for Vegas, they're coming up a little bit broke here.
And Eric, before we get you out of here, you're going to be leaving your gig at Pro Football Focus pretty shortly and going over to Sumer Sports, working with NFL teams through an analytical lens. So why don't you explain what your role is going to be with your new company here in a bit? And before you give these NFL teams the information that they want, why don't you just give it to us on the podcast?
Yeah, my role at PFF was very much B2B, working with teams, and then also the media side, which has been very fun. Thomas Dimitroff, the former general manager of the Falcons, is one of my friends, and he's the CEO of this company, and we decided to come together and try to help NFL teams optimize their roster. I also think that there will be eventually a media component to it where we'll still get to talk football and talk betting and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm super excited, and PFF is an amazing place, and I'm sad to go, but sometimes it's just time, and I'm really excited for what the future is in football analytics.
Eric, congrats on the new gig. It sounds like a pretty awesome company. And thanks again so much for joining us today and giving us all the different insights on the games for NFL Week 3. Before we say goodbye, make sure once again that you subscribe to the Beat the Closing Line podcast on Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. Eli, do you have any final words before we sign off?
Yeah, big thanks to Eric for joining us here on the show today. And be sure to check out all of our write-ups on thelines.com. My NFL Week 3 breakdown, 3 picks in there, is up on the website too.
Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. Eli, Mo, and myself will see you on Tuesday. And if you're betting this weekend, good luck.